The Canterville Ghost. As you listen to the story, try reading along in your own book. When you hear this sound, turn the page. Chapter 1. Canterville Castle. Mr. Otis looked at the castle with delight.
"I'll buy it,"
he cried.
"Excellent.
Replied his guide, Lord Canterville.
But perhaps I should warn you. Canterville Castle is haunted. My family had to move out many years ago, after my great-aunt had a dreadful experience.
A skeleton!
She never recovered."
Mr. Otis wasn't worried. He didn't believe in ghosts.
"I'm sure my family and I will be very happy here." "Well, don't say I didn't warn you."
A week later, Mr. and Mrs. Otis arrived with their children, Washington, Virginia, and the twins. They were greeted by an old woman who was neatly dressed in a white apron and cap.
Welcome to Canterville Castle. I'm Mrs. Umney, the housekeeper,
she said.
Come inside. There's tea for you in the library.
Cake!
Shouted the twins, diving in. Virginia wasn't interested in the food. She had spotted a poem in the library window.
If a child will enter the secret room and stay till the dead of the night, then at last Sir Simon can sleep in his tomb, and at Canterville all will be right. What does it mean?
Before she could show her father, Mrs. Otis cried out,
Oh dear, I'm afraid we've spilled something on the carpet, Mrs. Umney. It wasn't you, madam,
replied Mrs. Umney in a hushed voice.
Blood has been spilled there. How horrible!
Cried Mrs. Otis.
It must be removed at once.
Real blood! Ugh!
Mrs. Umney looked around nervously and began to speak in a low voice.
It is the blood of Lady Eleanor Canterville. She was murdered on that very spot by her husband, Sir Simon Canterville, 500 years ago. Oh, dear! 7 years later, Sir Simon Canterville disappeared. His body has never been found.
Mrs. Umney's voice began to shake.
His spirit haunts this house. That bloodstain will never go.
Who believes that ghost nonsense?
Washington jumped down onto the carpet and scrubbed at the bloodstain. Within seconds, it was gone. But as he stood up, there was a crash of thunder and a terrible flash of lightning. Mrs. Umney fainted. The thunderstorm lasted the entire night. Rain lashed at the windows and the wind howled down the chimneys. And next morning, in the very same spot on the library carpet, there was the bloodstain.
"She's fainted again." "I wish she wouldn't. She's rather heavy."
Chapter 2. Clanking Chains.
How could this have happened?
Don't worry, Papa. I'll clean it up again.
There must be a simple explanation,
cried Mr. Otis. That night, Mr. Otis locked the library door himself and took the key to bed with him. But the bloodstain still came back.
Help! Help! It's here again!
Perhaps ghosts do exist.
After what happened the following night, Mr. Otis thought differently about ghosts. At midnight, he was woken by a strange noise outside his room. It sounded like rusty chains being dragged along the ground, and it seemed to be coming closer every second.
What's that noise?
Mr. Otis was annoyed. He put on his slippers and picked up a small bottle from his bedside table. Then he opened the door. To a terrible sight! An old man with long, greasy hair and ragged clothes was glaring at him out of fiery red eyes.
You must be Sir Simon,
said Mr. Otis calmly.
I'm afraid, my dear sir, I must ask you to oil your chains. They make an awful noise. This bottle of oil should help. I have more if you need it.
Mr. Otis left the bottle on a table and went back to bed. For a moment, the Canterville Ghost was still. Then he smashed the bottle of oil onto the floor and fled down the corridor howling.
Whoosh!
The twins heard him as Sir Simon reached the top of the stairs. They raced out of their bedroom with a pillow. Sir Simon felt a rush of air as the pillow whizzed past his head. It very nearly hit him.
Take that, slimy Simon! We're not scared of you!
The ghost quickly vanished to appear in his secret chamber in the West Wing. He was furious.
I have been scaring people for hundreds of years,
He grumbled.
but never have I been treated like this. They should have been terrified. How dare these newcomers give me oil for my chains and throw pillows at my head? I must get my revenge.
Chapter 3. The Ghost's Revenge.
There's no need to be scared of ghosts,
Mr. Otis told his family the next morning.
but you mustn't throw pillows at them. It's rude.
The twins grinned.
We'll have to take those chains off him,
Said Mrs. Otis.
or we'll never get any sleep.
But for the rest of that week, there was no sign of the ghost. The twins looked for him everywhere. They wanted to play more tricks on him. Fresh blood stains continued to appear each morning. Strangely, each stain was a different shade. The family made guesses as to what shade it would be next.
Purple.
Pink!
Orange, yellow, blue.
One morning, it was even a brilliant green. When she saw that, Virginia looked cross, though she wouldn't say why. Meanwhile, the ghost was busy plotting his revenge. He spent days looking over his wardrobe, deciding what to wear.
Perfect. The ripped sheet and the rusty dagger.
He planned to creep to Washington's room and make faces at the boy from the foot of his bed. Then he would stab himself in the neck 3 times to the sound of slow music. Sir Simon especially disliked Washington. It was Washington who kept removing the bloodstains. Virginia, on the other hand, had never been rude.
I shall only groan at her a few times from her wardrobe.
He thought.
As for the twins,
The twins, of course, deserved the worst treatment. He'd get them. He would turn into a skeleton and crawl around their beds, staring at them from one rolling eyeball. At 10:30, the family went to bed. For a while, Sir Simon heard shrieks of laughter from the twins' room, but at last all was quiet. He crept stealthily into the corridor. An owl beat its wings against the window pane, but the Otis family slept on, peacefully unaware. Sir Simon glided along like an evil shadow, a cruel smile stretching his wrinkled mouth. Finally, he reached the corner of the passage that led to Washington's room.
Ha ha! The time has come.
He chuckled to himself, turned the corner, then let out a wail of terror. Sir Simon fell back, hiding his face in his bony white hands. Right in front of him was a horrible vision. It was bald and white, with red light streaming from its eyes. Sir Simon had never seen another ghost before. He was terrified.
Ah!
He fled back to his room, tripping on his sheet as he went. Back in his chamber, he flung himself into his coffin and slammed down the lid. But as the sun rose, his bravery returned.
I shall go and talk to the ghost.
He decided.
Perhaps we can deal with the twins together. 2 ghosts are better than 1.
By morning, the ghost looked very different. The light had gone from its eyes, and it had collapsed against the wall. Sir Simon rushed forward and seized it in his arms. To his horror, its head slipped off and rolled on the floor.
What's happened?
He was holding a white curtain, a broom, and a large pumpkin. He had been tricked. Sir Simon ground his toothless gums together. In fury, swore revenge, and stomped back to his coffin. Chapter 4. Sir Simon is upset. Sir Simon was cross and tired. The excitement of the past few days had been too much for him. For 5 days he stayed in his room. He even gave up making new bloodstains.
What's the point? They don't take me seriously.
With the twins constantly playing tricks on him, he only felt safe in his room. He knew it was his ghostly duty to appear in the corridor once a week, but he made sure he wasn't seen or heard. He even slipped into Mr. Otis's bedroom and took a bottle of oil for his chains. But he still wasn't left alone. The twins put down pins for him to tread on. One night they even stretched a piece of string across the corridor.
No! That's it.
He decided.
I'm going to scare those twins one last time if it kills me. I'll appear as my most terrifying character, Reckless Rupert, the Headless Earl.
He thought. Reckless Rupert always worked.
Not bad. Not bad at all.
Sir Simon spent 2 days getting ready. Finally, he was satisfied with his appearance. As the clock struck midnight, he made his way to the twins' bedroom. He flung open the door, and a large jug of icy water tipped over him. He was soaked. Sir Simon heard muffled shrieks of laughter from the twins' bed. Furious, Sir Simon squelched back to his room. The next day, he had a very bad cold.
I must give up all hope of scaring the Otis family,
He said sadly.
Why aren't I scary anymore? Perhaps I'm getting old.
He started creeping along the passages in his slippers. One night, he decided to creep to the library. He wanted to see if there was any blood left on the carpet. Suddenly, 2 figures jumped out at him from the darkness.
Boo! Boo!
In terror, Sir Simon ran to the stairs. But there was Washington Otis aiming a garden hose at him. Sir Simon vanished into the fireplace, which luckily for him wasn't lit. He arrived back in his room in a terrible state.
Look at me! I'm covered in soot!
After that, he did not leave his room at all. The Otis family started to think the ghost had left. The twins lay in wait for Sir Simon for several nights, but there was no sign of him.
Sir Simon! Where are you?
I'll write a letter to Lord Canterville,
said Mr. Otis.
I'm sure he'll be interested to hear that Sir Simon has gone away at last.
Chapter 5. The Secret Chamber. Some weeks later, Virginia was out walking in the fields when she tore her dress climbing through a hedge.
Oh no! Mama will be furious. I'll have to change,
she thought, and decided to go up the back staircase so she wouldn't be seen. On the way, she noticed that the door to the tapestry room was open.
How odd,
she thought.
No one ever uses the tapestry room.
Virginia peered around the door. To her surprise, she saw the Canterville Ghost. Sir Simon was sitting by the window, his head in his hands. He looked so upset, Virginia thought she should try and comfort him.
We thought you'd gone. Cheer up,
she said.
The boys are going to school tomorrow, so the tricks will stop. Besides, if you behave yourself, no one will annoy you.
You don't understand.
Sir Simon jumped up.
How can I behave myself?
He shouted.
I have to rattle my chains and groan through keyholes and walk around at night. I'm a ghost.
You don't have to do anything,
said Virginia.
What's more, you've been very wicked. Mrs. Umney told us that you murdered your wife. It's wrong to kill people,
she pointed out.
Very wrong indeed.
Yes, it was wrong,
sighed Sir Simon.
But that was no reason for her brothers to starve me to death.
Oh, poor ghost,
said Virginia.
I didn't know about that. Are you hungry now? Perhaps you'd like some sandwiches.
No, thank you,
he answered.
I never eat now, but it's kind of you to offer. You know,
he added,
you're much nicer than the rest of your horrible family.
How dare you be rude about my family?
cried Virginia.
You're mean. You lie, and you stole all the paints out of my paint pots for that blood stain. First my reds, then the yellows, even the greens. I couldn't paint anything. I think you should apologize,
Virginia demanded. The ghost shrugged.
I don't see why I should. After all, what else could I do? Real blood is so hard to get hold of these days, and your brother would keep cleaning up.
Fine,
said Virginia.
If you won't apologize, I'm leaving.
She turned to go.
No, please don't go. Please help me,
Sir Simon called.
I'm so unhappy and so very, very tired.
Now Virginia was curious.
Why are you tired? Can't you sleep?
Not a wink. I haven't slept for 500 years.
Sir Simon told her. Virginia gasped.
And it would be so pleasant to lie in the soft brown earth,
the ghost went on,
with grasses waving above my head, listening to silence.
Can't anyone help you?
asked Virginia.
You could.
whispered the ghost. Virginia trembled as he spoke, and a cold shudder passed through her.
How?
She asked.
Have you ever read the poem on the library window?
Yes, often.
Virginia thought of it now.
If a child will enter the secret room and stay till the dead of the night, then at last Sir Simon can sleep in his tomb, and at Canterville all will be right. But I don't know what it means.
It means
Said the ghost.
that you must come with me to my secret chamber and pray for me.
That sounds easy.
Said Virginia. Said Sir Simon.
But no living person has ever entered the chamber and come out alive.
Virginia was terrified, but she did want to help.
I'll come with you, Sir Simon.
She said bravely.
Lead the way.
Sir Simon took her hand in his cold, clammy fingers. Together they walked to the end of the room, where the wall disappeared before her eyes. In a moment, the wall had closed behind them, and Virginia vanished into the ghost's secret chamber. Chapter 6. Peace at Last. "10 minutes later, the bell rang for tea. As Virginia did not appear, Mrs. Otis sent a footman to find her.
I can't find her anywhere, ma'am.
At first, Mrs. Otis thought she must be in the stables. When Virginia still hadn't returned 2 hours later, she began to panic.
Boys,
She called to her sons.
go and see if you can find her.
She's vanished.
Oh, where can she be?
Mrs. Otis even asked Mr. Otis to drain the fish pond. But there was no sign of Virginia anywhere. At last, the family sat down to supper. It was a sad meal, and hardly anyone spoke. Even the twins were quiet. As the family left the dining room, the clock in the tower began to strike midnight.
Everyone to bed now.
I'll never be able to sleep.
On the last stroke, there was a crash and a sudden shrill cry. A panel at the top of the staircase flew back, and Virginia staggered out. Everyone rushed up to her. Mrs. Otis hugged her, Mr. Otis patted her head, and the twins danced around them all.
Where have you been?
Said Mrs. Otis rather angrily.
I've been so worried. You must not play tricks, Virginia.
Except on the ghost. I've been with the ghost.
Said Virginia quietly.
He's gone. He's been very wicked, but he was sorry for everything he'd done. And look, he gave me this box of jewels just before he left.
4 days later, they held a funeral for Sir Simon. The procession left Canterville Castle at 11 o'clock at night. The carriages were drawn by 4 black horses, each with a great tuft of ostrich feathers on its head.
Don't you think 500 years is rather long to wait for a funeral?
Lord Canterville came all the way from Wales to take part. He sat in the first carriage with Virginia. Then came Mr. and Mrs. Otis, followed by Washington and the twins. It was all wonderfully impressive. In the last carriage sat Mrs. Umney. After all, she had been frightened of the ghost for 50 years. It was only fair she should see the last of him.
Are you sure he's gone?
The next day, Mr. Otis had a word with Lord Canterville.
I think we should return the box of jewels to you. They're beautiful, especially the ruby necklace. Please take them. No, thank you, Mr. Otis,
Replied Lord Canterville.
The jewels were given to Virginia for being so brave, and I think she deserves them."
Virginia wore the ruby necklace whenever she went to a party. But however much Washington and the twins begged, she never told anyone what happened in the secret chamber. Sir Simon Canterville, rest in peace.